So predicting the future is rather difficult. There's a lot of interesting predictions that were pretty much wrong within about 5 or 10 years or so. One of the worst ones I think I remember hearing was that when the World Wide Web was first put up, that someone said, no, it's not really going to have much of an impact on the world. It'll probably be about the same as the fax machine, which was a bit off the mark to say the least. But it is difficult. It's hard to predict the future at the end of the day because you never know. You know it's coming. You don't know what's going to come, though. That's the difference. But I shared this video recently with my good friend Ed Bernardin, and it's all from all the way back in 1964, so exactly 60 years ago. And it's a man called Arthur C. Clarke who made some really, really fascinating predictions for the future. And we're just going to go through them now, Ed, because some of them haven't really happened yet, fair to say, but some of them are absolutely spot on.
Yeah, I think Arthur C. Clarke did a great job here. For the most part, I think he's way more got right than he got wrong. And one thing worth mentioning about him, he was known in his day as a futurist, and he was a co-writer of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is probably one of the most futuristic space movies ever made. Even back in 2001 to this day, it really stands out. And he was big into space, and I think it's in 1945 he even predicted satellite communication with geo stationary orbits, and so the guy had a knack for thinking about the future. Be interesting to see what he says today. But yeah, let's take a look and see what he said.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, if you recognize that name, 2001: A Space Odyssey, it's the same name as the film that was made by Stanley Kubrick, which is, in my opinion, is one of the greatest films ever made. It's definitely one that leaves an impact on you, and hearing these predictions also leave an impact on you too. Shout out to the BBC for this. At the end of the day, it's on their YouTube channel, the one that we're reacting to here. But yeah, he absolutely got a lot right. It's really fascinating. Just so long ago, this is before we landed on the moon, before they put a man on the moon. To put it into perspective of how long ago this was, and he was predicting things like incredible telecommunications and effectively the internet. So yeah, let's just dive into this.
Horizon filmed him at the World's Fair in New York. He's Arthur Clarke.
Trying to predict the future is a discouraging and hazardous occupation because the prophet invariably falls between two stools. If his predictions sound at all reasonable, you can be quite sure that in 20 or at most 50 years, the progress of science and technology has made him seem ridiculously conservative. On the other hand, if by some miracle a prophet could describe the future exactly as it was going to take place, his predictions would sound so absurd, so far-fetched, that everybody would laugh him to scorn. This has proved to be true in the past, and it will undoubtedly be true, even more so, of the century to come. The only thing we can be sure of about the future is that it will be absolutely fantastic. So, if what I say now seems to you to be very reasonable, then I'll have failed completely. Only if what I tell you appears absolutely unbelievable have we any chance of visualizing the future as it really will happen. Let's start by looking at the city of the future. Some people think that it will be like this. And they're quite right. In fact, everything you see now already exists. All the materials, all the ideas, these things could be put into practice immediately. But what about the city of the day after tomorrow? Say the year 2000. I think it will be completely different. In fact, it may not even exist at all.
It's interesting in this intro section here how he says, if you're going to make a prediction and it doesn't seem absurd and far-fetched, you're probably not doing your job. And at the time, I think the thing you have to remember here is, although it seems like, oh, a lot of the things you're going to hear in this video is, wow, we got them right. To be able to make those back then so that they would seem absolutely fantastic, I think wasn't an easy thing to do. But I think one thing to think about when you think about this absolutely fantastic, and this is true of many of these videos you see that predict the future, they always talk about the good things. And they really, for instance, if you have the internet for instant communication, you don't get the other part, which is, well, what's the bad things that can happen with something like that? So there is a focus here on what's really, really good. I did like his city. Um, in some ways, you're starting to see cities like I think of Dubai or some of these super modern, built up from nothing kind of cities. They do
Mm.
tend to look like what you're seeing there. Yet at the same time, if you go to downtown Paris, it's not that different than it was 100 years ago, or maybe even 200 years ago.
And that's a good thing. To be fair, we've preserved the kind of history there with an old city like that. But you're right, the new cities, the planned cities, the modern cities. I mean, you think about what Saudi Arabia is trying to do with the line and stuff like that over in Neom, which that's a separate discussion what's going on there. But that is more like what he's predicting here. And Dubai is a good shout as well, actually. Where it just showed what city planners are doing. And again, this is just so long ago. You think about how people were living at this time for the most part, what the new stuff was at this time. I don't know what it was like in the States, but here in the UK, things like council flats and stuff like that, you compare that to what he's predicting here, and it's Stone Age and Space Age. I've used that analogy quite a few times, but it is almost, and that's the really fascinating difference there. And he's right in a sense as well, because he's saying all the materials are there now, back in the 60s to what they were now. I mean, obviously things like building materials have changed, of course, but some things have stayed the same. A lot of glass stuff, that's the kind of futuristic buildings, and you do see that in older cities as well, like London, which have gone through a lot of change in that time. But you still do see these futuristic buildings popping up, things like the Gherkin, and the Shard and stuff like that. They're very much of that kind of ilk.
Well, going back to Paris for just a second, on the outside, it looks like 200 years ago. But if you were
Mm.
to take a flat in Paris of 200 years ago and compare what it looks like now you probably start to see some of Arthur C. Clarke's predictions that are inside those buildings. So there's an appreciation I think that humans have for preserving some of the things they know that were great in the past and wanting to continue, like the layout of a city or whatever it might be. But again, his prediction of the city, I thought, you have these interesting buildings made from materials that are available now, but on the side, there was the greenery. And in the things that they're doing in Dubai and other cities around the world, when they build these modern cities, there is it's the Central Park together with all the high rises, right? You got to have both. And so I think he got that one right.
I think it will be completely different. In fact, it may not even exist at all. Oh, I'm not thinking of the atom bomb and the next Stone Age. I'm thinking of the incredible breakthrough which has been made possible by developments in communications, particularly the transistor and, above all, the communications satellite. These things will make possible a world in which we can be in instant contact with each other, wherever we may be, where we can contact our friends anywhere on Earth, even if we don't know their actual physical location. It will be possible in that age, perhaps only 50 years from now, for a man to conduct his business from Tahiti or Bali just as well as he could from London. In fact, if it proves worthwhile, almost any executive skill, any administrative skill, even any physical skill could be made independent of distance. I'm perfectly serious when I suggest that one day we may have brain surgeons in Edinburgh operating on patients in New Zealand. When that time comes, the whole world will have shrunk to a point, and the traditional role of the city as a meeting place for man would have ceased to make any sense. In fact, men will no longer commute, they will communicate. They won't have to travel for business anymore, they'll only travel for pleasure. I only hope that when that day comes, and when the city is abolished, the whole world isn't turned into one giant suburb. In that world of the future, we will not be the only...
Just hearing that, I honestly have goosebumps, because what are we doing right now, Ed? We're communicating via the internet on opposite sides of the Atlantic, watching a YouTube video of of Arthur C. Clarke. He's absolutely spot on. Working from home, it's there. Commuting is, for a lot of people, a thing of the past. It's a thing of the past for me. Never want to do it again. And it's, it's really, really accelerated. And he did this in 64. It's only become a popular thing in less than the last 5 years. The pandemic was the catalyst really for that. And if it wasn't for that, it might not have happened for a little while yet. But he's absolutely spot on here.
Yeah, and I think the mention of the pandemic is exactly right. He didn't say there was going to be a pandemic, he didn't predict that, but like you said, would this have ever even happened? And now we take it for granted. And you and I do a lot of interviews on different podcasts and this and that, and now it's made it possible to talk to anyone anytime. But I think, again, looking at, I don't know if you want to call it the negative side, but certainly the other side, which is nothing replaces being in the same room with someone, being able to see them face to face.
Yeah.
And now you're seeing that where a lot of companies are finally saying, hey, you got to come back to work 3 days a week, for some even full time, because if you're in the business of selling or real group work that you need to combine your thinking, I think that there's nothing that's going to take face to face away. I really like his prediction of a remote operation in Australia from Europe or United States, wherever it might be. That type of thing is starting to happen. Certainly, we have video medicine where you can a doctor can speak to someone and try and do diagnostics where they may be instrumented, and then the remote control of a robot. And I think they've even looked at trying to do some of those things, or soon to be doing some of those things, say, for instance, in the space station, where you can't always have a surgeon up there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I saw an article a few weeks back of somebody who, like some sort of surgeon, I think it was some sort of heart surgery, a really serious one, and they managed to complete that by using a PlayStation controller because they were in a different part of the world. They just did it through the internet. They controlled the instruments from a different continent using a video game controller. That just shows you how far these things have come. And again, to put this in perspective, you had at this time, well, in 1969 when they put a man on the moon for the first time, when NASA did that, they did that with a room full of computers, a massive room full of computers with less computing power than the laptop that's on my desk right now. Just showing how much we've come. This is 5 years before that, and he's predicting, people are going to be able to do surgeries across continents. People are going to be able to do their job no matter where they are in the world. It must have, like he said in the intro, it must have seemed absolutely crazy to the people at the time, but he was right.
It's a subtle thing, but you mentioned this, computers being the size of a room, and that's the world he lived in 1964. And although he's trying to be fantastic and absurd and all those things, he really did miss the miniaturization of that room-sized computer into something you can hold in one hand. And the fact that you could do that actually changes a bit of what's possible. I travel only for pleasure. It's interesting. And again, it goes back to that face-to-face type of thing. But one of the biggest things we actually use our devices for is for traveling now, and assistant. And I think, again, on some of these videos that predict the future, the miniaturization of the computer, I think, is something, or the rise of AI as an assistant is something that somewhat gets missed a little bit.
When the AI one is a very, very recent one, we're seeing a real trend of that at the moment. All these phones now being sold with Apple Intelligence, Google AI, whatever it's called. That's become it's been there for a little while, but it's seeming to go for a real revolution now. Every time you do a search on Google now, it's all AI assisted. And that's literally happened in the last couple months, not even years. That's literally the last couple months I've noticed that while using the internet. So, yeah, again, it's seeing the rise of that. It's seeing being able to do that that far ahead. He got the power of it right, in effect, but yeah, it's miniaturization of it. Every year technology gets twice as fast and twice as small. That's the kind of thing now. I'm not sure it was quite at that pace back then.
Well, you mentioned that you do a search in Google and it'll have its little AI bot give you its answer. But with each answer or sub answer or section of the answer, it gives you a little link as to where it got the information. And if you go to that link, you can learn a lot more than just by reading the AI summary. But again, it goes to show how the layering of AI or computer assistance on top of this instant communication gives you just another level of, I don't know, convenience or knowledge or whatever you want to call it,
Mm,
that was, even for him, it was a little bit hard to see back in 1964.
absolutely, yeah.
One of the coming techniques will be what we might call bioengineering, the development of intelligent and useful servants among the other animals on this planet, particularly the great apes and in the oceans, the dolphins and whales. You know, it's a scandal of which we should be thoroughly ashamed that prehistoric man tamed all the domestic animals we have today. We haven't added one in the last 5,000 years. It's about time we did so, and with our present knowledge of animal psychology and genetics, we could certainly solve the servant problem with the help of the monkey kingdom. Of course, eventually our super chimpanzees would start forming trade unions and we'd right back where we started. However, the most intelligent inhabitants of that future world won't be men or monkeys. They'll be machines, the remote descendants of today's computers. Now, the present-day electronic brains are complete morons, but this will not be true in another generation. They will start to think, and eventually they will completely outthink their makers. Is this depressing? I don't see why it should be. We superseded the Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal men, and we presume we're an improvement. I think we should regard it as a privilege to be stepping stones to higher things. That organic or biological evolution has about come to its end, and we are now at the beginning of inorganic or mechanical evolution, which will be thousands of times swifter. But even if the future does belong to the robots, our bodies and our brains still have immense untapped potentialities. For example, to cope with the information explosion, we may develop a machine for recording information directly onto the brain, as today we can record a symphony on tape. So we may one day be able to become instant experts, learning Chinese overnight, for example. Or we may be able to recall completely memories of past events so that we seem to relive them. In fact, techniques are already known for doing this in a rather limited way at the present. Alternatively, we may prefer to totally...
This section was crazy.
This is a lot. This is a lot to unpack, isn't it?
Oh my God. Well, let's just go for it, right?
That's what we're here for. Yeah.
All righty, all righty. There's parts of this section that seem a little crazy. His thoughts related to animals and how we haven't taken better advantage of animals or improved them in some way. So a little bit off, I think, on the thing about having whales, dolphins, and monkeys as our servants. But when it comes to AI, I mean, we're having discussions right now. Is AI going to take over? What are we going to do? But he takes a step back and he says, we should consider it a privilege to be a stepping stone to higher things, which I think he's referring to AI somewhat being the next rulers of the world, and biological evolution is about over. I mean, it's eye-opening in a certain way. And then he goes into this whole thing about programming brains and reading minds, and that's certainly been happening. The ability to at least see what sections of a brain is active, the ability to program them, that's, except for maybe with animals like mice or whatever, hasn't really been done yet, but might not be that far away. But it's interesting. It's a privilege to allow this non-biological next, if you want to call it human or superhuman, come to be, yet at the same time, he says, but our brain has a lot of hidden potential. So
Mm.
I think for him it would be great if he could be here today and predict what's going to happen based on what he sees, because there's a lot he's throwing out here. And to figure out how all this is going to play out, I think it's just as hard for us to do it right now as it was for him to do it in 1964.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's hard enough to predict things 5 years from now, let alone what he was doing, predicting stuff. I mean, he says the year 2000, so he's talking at least 35 years from where he was at that point. I'll tell you what, after we've done this recording, I'll probably look him up some more, see if he's done anything since, because I did see a comment that said that he lived until the year 2008, so he would have been around when the internet was, I mean, social media was around by that time even, and YouTube, so I'm fascinated to see what he thought about that once some of his stuff started coming true. I mean, the evolution thing, for me, that is really, really fascinating what he's saying with that, because you could argue, in a sense, it's already started to happen, because you've got things like smartwatches, smartphones, things that we all carry on us at different times. You've got things like I don't know if like pacemakers and things were around back then. But I know they're definitely a thing now. Knee replacement, hip replacements. There's a lot of people, like my dad, for example. He's got 2 knee replacements. Every time he goes through airport security, he gets pinged on the metal detector because of that. He is, in a sense, part machine. In a sense, in a very basic way. It's already started to happen. His natural knees were no longer enough to keep him going after 60 odd years. So we're already seeing little trickles of this happening. Because people are moving on. What the access to information. I mean, I've listened to a lot of podcasts that go over this sort of stuff. The access to information with like mobile phones. They're much more than phones. They are a device to communicate with the entire world if you want to. You can get any information out there. The average, again, and he kind of touches on this about like people a long time in the past and the amount of information they actually had access to and how it's grown exponentially. I'm sure I saw something like the average person nowadays consumes more information in a month than what most people did in their entire lives in the 1800s. So that just kind of scales it up and shows how much things have altered in this time.
Yeah, and you don't even know what to do with all this information you have. But you were talking about your father and how we've augmented the human, and probably one of the most interesting things in that area is these exoskeletons, robotic exoskeleton that you can wear that allow people to walk that may not have been able to walk, maybe even connecting some of these things to the human brain. Obviously, a device like that may be online. What if AI takes over? Because then, if we are all relying on these types of things to keep us going when we're 120 years old or whatever it is, and now suddenly we become the slaves of the AI master. I mean, there's the good path, the bad path, and the truth is probably somewhere in between. And I think I have to give him an A plus, except for the animal part, which is a little crazy with the servant dolphin and whale. But other than that, I think he did a fantastic job here on at least laying out where this might all go and what some of the issues are going to be in the rise of AI, shall we say.
Oh yeah. To predict this all the way back then was just something, just incredible. I mean, he does mention about the robots in that and how they might replace us and all this and that. I think just compare. I mean, the animal thing's a strange one. It is a strange one for sure, but I don't know. I think it would have been very hard to foresee what we could do now. With some of the characteristics what they have. I think that's probably what they was trying to get at there. Like the characteristics these animals have, we could never have that. The strength or whatever, or something like that. Maybe that's what he was kind of getting at there, but. You can't hit the mark with everyone, I suppose. He's done a really good job with this.
Well, too, the other thing too is the big downfall about some of these things is the fact that there may be unions. Things may be
Yeah.
Wow, that's the worst thing that could happen. I hope there's no union leaders that are listening to this, but it probably tells you what the state of things were in 1964. Maybe that was the time when unions were looked down upon or on the rise, or who knows what. But it's probably telling about the time when the predictions were made if you start to, read behind the lines here a little bit.
Imagine if Google went on strike. What would happen to the world? Google becomes sentient and then just goes on strike. It's like, no, I'm not going to let you search anything. No, nothing.
Not until you pay.
Not until you give me a pay rise, yeah. And I think people will probably pay.
Last longer. After all, it's only in this century that a patient had a better than 50% chance of any improvement when he was treated by his doctors. One of the great medical discoveries of the near future will be a method of suspended animation, so that a man can sleep away down the centuries and in this manner travel into the future. This technique, which may possibly be based on deep freezing, will one day be used to send into the future people suffering from diseases or ailments beyond the ability of present-day medical science to cure. Though I don't really know how one will calculate the health insurance contributions to pay for medical treatment 500 years hence. Another use of suspended animation will be for the long-range exploration of space. In this way, us short-lived creatures will be able to travel enormous distances, although we may not in the future, because even immortality may be on the cards one day. However, even without immortality, we may be able to make journeys lasting thousands of years, and such journeys will be necessary if we ever wish to cross the enormous gulfs which separate us from the stars. Distances so great that even light, traveling at 600 million miles every hour, takes years to cross them. But why should we attempt these immense voyages? Well, because it seems fairly certain that, at least at this moment in time, there are no other intelligent creatures in our own solar system. We'll have to go out to the stars to meet them. For certainly out there among the 100,000 million other suns of our universe, there must be many civilizations, perhaps far higher than our own. The first contact with intelligent extraterrestrials will be the greatest adventure in the future of man. It may not happen for centuries, but one day it will come. Meanwhile, near at home, there's plenty to do in this solar system on the moon and planets. Today, we can just reach the moon. Tomorrow, men will be living there. 100 years from now, some men will call it home. At the moment, it's a very unattractive kind of place to imagine as a home, and this is true of all the planets. There's not one on which unprotected men could live, or on which any form of life as we know it could exist, with the possible exception of Mars. However, 100 years from now, things will be very different. With the techniques which we are now acquiring, it will one day be possible to modify the environments on at least some of the planets so that men can live there without spacesuits or airtight cities. The technique for this has been called planetary engineering, and one astronomer has coined the very optimistic phrase, the reconstruction of the solar system.
Again, a lot in there. Living forever, immortality.
Yes, sir. Well, in this section, I think he's done a really, really good job. Suspended animation for space travel. Although we're not really doing that, we certainly know that that's going to be important for these super long trips. Deep freezing, so that you can be cured in the future. That we're freezing people. I don't know if we know how to unfreeze them, but we certainly know how to freeze them. And some are paying big money to have that happen to them. And then the whole idea of, well, he calls planetary engineering, which I think now we're calling it terraforming, specifically focused on Mars, which is exactly what everyone is focusing on, or many are. And even Elon Musk, his idea to nuke the polar ice caps, nuclear bomb, polar ice caps on Mars, send all the CO2 and water that's trapped there to surround the planet, and then magically start to, warm it up and all that. Although at the same time, some people say that idea is not going to work because it's going to make a nuclear winter. But nonetheless, I think He's on the money on that one. Although he did say 100 years from now for the planetary engineering. The one thing I think that maybe he missed here, going back a little bit to the animals, I think he was thinking about the animals more in reprogramming their brains or whatever, but he hasn't really thought about re-engineering from a biological standpoint, like getting into the genes and trying to manipulate the genes and actually create new types of animals or superhumans or that kind of thing. I get that was like maybe even beyond Arthur C. Clarke at that time.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at this now. Just over 10 years before this DNA was discovered. So I think being able to manipulate it in some way would have seemed so like, no, you can't change that. That's like the God thing, That's just there. You can't go playing with that. But we are. It's definitely possible. That's for sure. But yeah, the 100-year terraforming thing. I wasn't aware of Elon Musk's plan to nuke Mars. I think I saw an article about it, but I just kind of dismissed. So yeah, sure, he said that. But yeah, I mean, the terraforming Mars things. I've always been fascinated by that. I played a video game which some people may remember, Red Faction Guerrilla, which is set on Mars, and they did exactly that. And I've watched a few documentaries about how you could make Mars habitable for people to not even wear a spacesuit or whatever, because in theory, if it had an atmosphere, it could be like a little Earth. But unfortunately, it doesn't have an atmosphere really at the moment. So that's why it's kind of just a barren rock for the most part. But we found liquid. I'm sure we found liquid water on Mars now, haven't we? So the building blocks are there effectively. That's a big step. And again, just to emphasize when this was before the moon landing. This was, if I'm not mistaken, Ed, you'll probably know better than me, to be fair, but at that sort of time, people were thinking, right, we'll go to the moon, we'll colonize it. We'll go to Mars, we'll colonize it. We'll go to Jupiter, we'll colonize it. And now we're finding out more about a lot of these planets. And it's like, yeah, that's actually really, really difficult. We can't do that. There's no point to doing that.
Well, we got to the moon in 1969, and then we played around for a few more years after that, and then we did nothing for 50 years almost. So it's almost like we're picking up now where we could have been in the early 70s. I think there was a Netflix series that actually showed what would have happened if we would have kept going. And of course, they ended up colonizing Mars. And they didn't terraform it, but they did end up colonizing it. But again, for 1964, I think you got to give them an A, if not an A plus, for getting pretty close, at least identifying the areas where we're going to be focusing here 50, 60, 70 years ahead of when he was making the predictions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And as we're about to get onto, he sort of predicted something that's come around in the last 10 years or so, technology-wise, something that's kind of become commonplace, really. Most universities have one, so let's dive in.
Call it the replicator, and it's simply a duplicating machine. But it's a duplicating machine that can make an exact copy of anything. Now, we're already familiar with perfect copies of printing, of pictures, and of sounds. Yet, the camera and the tape recorder would have seemed miraculous to our ancestors. And to a medieval monk, who perhaps in his whole life only saw a few dozen books, each one patiently copied by hand, our present world, in which literally millions of books exist, would again have seemed absolutely inconceivable. Can we imagine a world in which objects can be made as easily as today we can make books? Well, don't ask me exactly how the replicator would work. If I knew, I'd patent it at once. Confronted with such a device, our present society would probably sink into a kind of gluttonous barbarism, because everybody would want unlimited quantities of everything, since nothing would cost anything. In fact, cynics may doubt if any human society could survive an invention which would lead to unlimited abundance and the final ending of the curse of Adam. And yet, human beings are almost infinitely adaptable.
So the replicator, I think in everyone's mind, instantly starts to think about 3D printing. And 3D printing has gone from simple plastics to metal to even biological substances. So very, very good there. However, Here, I think, is probably one of the biggest things he has missed, not only in this section, but probably in the entire thing, which is his word is gluttonous barbarism. Gluttonous barbarism is going to result because the 3D printer, this replicator, is going to make so much for everyone that I guess we all are going to turn into barbaric gluttons, I suppose. And I think what his line of thinking was more along the lines of labor is eliminated. We don't need people in factories to make anything. This machine will make it all. But he forgot two important things you need to make these things. One is materials. Where are you going to get those materials? How do you mine them? How do you get them there? And then something I think that pervades the entire thing, which is energy. Back in 64, the oil was abundant. You're just coming out of the atomic age, the beginning of atomic power generation, nuclear power plants, that type of thing. And there's never really a mention in all of this about how we're going to get the energy we need to run these replicators. And so here I give him 50-50. I don't know if that means a C or a B, but the replicator, unbelievable insight on that. However, I don't think he thought through steps 2 and 3, which is, well, what are you putting into that replicator for when it's going to be popping out all these great things that will have unlimited abundance, as he says.
Yeah, and maybe he was thinking along the lines of something that could just potentially just produce something, doesn't need to be fed anything, but then you're breaking the laws of physics. But to be fair, in his day and through his life, the laws of physics would have changed so much during that time. Maybe he thought that, oh, maybe they'll change again. Maybe they'll find a way to make something out of nothing. And with the energy one, yeah, you're absolutely right with that. And again, maybe I might be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure during this time nuclear power was really taking off. And to this day, I mean, this is a separate discussion for another day. To this day, I think it's a really good option in general for most parts of the world because you make so much energy from it. It produces so much power that maybe he just thought, well, we'll just have loads of those. Every country will have loads of nuclear power plants, and energy will just be plentiful. It won't run out. Like you said, the oil back then, it was flowing. It was not difficult to get. It was coming out of everywhere, basically.
Yeah, I think in the 60s, a gallon of gasoline was, way below $1, like, 25, 30 cents for a gallon of gas. And again, nuclear power plants were brand new, and they would just a few fuel rods would give you energy for years and years and years. So, but still, again, 3D printing, my goodness. And he actually compares it to the printing of a book. Right.
Yeah.
And so very well done there.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
Look at the incredible changes we've experienced and survived from the Stone Age to the present time. And yet even greater changes are still to come, because the future is not merely an extension of the present with bigger and better machines and cities and gadgets. It will be fundamentally different. And many of the things we take for granted will one day pass away as completely as, spinning wheels and sedan chairs and oil lamps. And that is why the future is so endlessly fascinating, because try as we can, we'll never outguess it.
I mean, yeah, that's absolutely spot on. Predicting the future is so difficult, and he did a fine job of it, to be honest. He's pretty much on the money with a good, at least 80% of what he said in that video, I'd say.
Yeah, he did. I think he did a really, really good job. I like the images at the end. It's sort of a mix between a spaceship, but you got to have analog buttons in it and switches, which is typical, I think, of futuristic images of control centers and things like that back in the 60s. But I also find it interesting is when Tesla and the Model 3 came out with their computer screen interface for the car, the next step, I believe Audi might have been one of the first here, took that screen and actually split it up a little bit. and
Mm.
put certain things in front of the driver. And then everyone's trying to figure out how to make a tactical button so that you can reach down and touch your screen and still keep your eyes on the road, heads up displays, all this kind of thing. So in some ways, it may be going back a little bit to that being able to touch and feel. And maybe that's a theme for the whole thing. He predicted remote working, but yet somehow there's a satisfaction about being in the same room with someone and talking to them or doing an interview or whatever it might be, or being able to touch a button rather than swiping a screen. And mixing those things together is something I think a lot of these future predictions miss. That, okay, AI is going to take over, but there's still going to be this human element. But in the end, um, it was, I think it's going to be just as hard for us now to predict what's going to happen in 50 years as it was for him back in 64. And for us to do as good a job as he did as to what's going to be happening, say, in the year 2100, I think would be really, really hard to do. So,
Yeah.
Arthur C. Clarke, fantastic job. I think, it'd be great if you could find that one. If he did do anything in after 2000 to see what he said, it would be great to see it.
I'm definitely going to look it up. I'm definitely going to look it up because, like I said, yeah, he lived for a long time after this, and he would have seen some of his predictions come true, or at least seen them to the point where it's like, yeah, this is going to happen. If it's not already happened by that point. And you're right. You're right about the human element. That's something that we're never going to escape, and nor should we. Nor should we, because then then we become the machines. Then we're soulless in a sense, for lack of a better term. I mean, for example, like when the pandemic was happening, when it first happened, I was one of the clients that I used to work with in my old job was one of the major supermarkets in the UK, and they were worried that people would stop going to supermarkets because that all showed, well, you don't need to go there, you just have it delivered. But what they found is as soon as they opened the doors again to allow people in freely, effectively without the people limit in indoor spaces, is that people just came back in the droves. It's gone back to exactly the same level as what it was before because people want that human interaction. Even if it's just speaking to the person behind the till, speaking to somebody about where this certain item is on a certain aisle, particularly older people would always come in for that because they wanted that interaction. And that might be the one bit of actual communication face to face they had in that entire day. But you feel a bit lost without it. I mean, I feel that with, don't get me wrong, Ed, I love talking to you like this, but if I do my work throughout the entire day and I just stay in house and I don't really go and see anybody, don't go to the shops, don't go to the petrol station or whatever, it just feels a bit weird by the end of the day. And that's even if I spoke to someone on Zoom like this or I spoke to someone over the phone. You can't beat that human interaction. You can't replicate that.
Well, maybe get a dog or something like that. That may be, it might help you a little bit. But no, I think this human side of all this is something we have to remember. And, it's human nature and maybe society in general. If you think about the greatest civilizations that have ever existed, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Romans, the great civilizations that are alive today, one of the things that happens to them is they think, we're the greatest. And
Mm,
how could it get any better? And as soon as you start thinking like that, that's when it's the beginning of the end, because that's usually when they start to fall apart. It's happened over and over again.
mm,
The interesting thing I think that he said was we should consider it a privilege that we're going to bring an end to biological evolution and allow the
oh,
machines to take over. I don't know. Maybe it's inevitable that the machines will take. It's hard to say, um, but I'm sure most of us and many of us think, that'll never happen. We'll just take the batteries out, and then they won't. Then it'll all come to an end, and then maybe the machines will take over someday, and they'll think they've got it made, and then some semi-biological thing that's lurking, like the mammals that were lurking when the dinosaurs were around, will emerge and push them out of the way. So. I guess we should heed some of his advice and predictions here, and keep them in mind as we move forward and try to make our own predictions, or even live in the world that we're in today.
yeah, yeah. Well, exactly. Things are changing at a rapid pace, aren't they? last 5, 10 years or so, we've seen some incredible changes with the world, and we'll have to see what happens next. We'll see it. We'll see if we get animatronic monkeys or dolphins in our house one day. Somehow I doubt it, but you never know. I'm sure all the other predictions, like you said, seem crazy at the time, but they're happening, and a lot of them have already happened. So, yeah, hope you enjoyed watching that one, guys. Listening to that one. If you're wondering why this is on the Motoring Chronicle, it's because he mentioned cities and commuting, and that I feel like this is the most applicable channel for this video because unfortunately, there is no tech chronicle. So this is the closest thing we have to it. But when he said he really wants to do a video on this on this Ed kind of reacting to it and stuff, I thought, yeah, we've got to do this one because it is just so amazing. And a lot of people probably haven't seen this video. That's the thing. A lot of people have over 1 million views on it. I could only dream of getting to that level, but yeah, a lot of people may not have seen this video. So discovering it and watching the full one as well is definitely something I would recommend.
And George, I really have to get going. I'm going to fire up my replicator and make a couple of Big Macs for lunch. If you want, I'll send you the program. You can fire up
Uh-huh.
yours and we can have lunch together remotely. Wouldn't be the same as being there with you, but hey, the
Mhm.
replicator could make anything we want. So maybe even an order of fries. I'll throw that in as well.
I'll
But hey,
say.
great talking to you as usual.
Yeah, all I will say to that is that other burgers are available. But yes, so thank you very much, Ed. Enjoyed it as always, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. We've got some more videos like this coming up as well in the near future. That is one prediction I will say with a lot of confidence. But yeah, of course, if you've got any suggestions for topics to cover, any videos for us to react to, do let us know in the comments below, guys. I really do enjoy making these ones, and I know it's the same for Ed too. But yeah, if you want to see more content from the motoringchronicle.com, you can head over to the website, or head over to our Microsoft, YouTube, like, share, comment, subscribe as always, guys. Have a good one, and we'll see you in the future.